All right, so in this one, it's time that we actually submit and create a comment for our post. We have a way to display them, but we don't have a way to create them where they should be, which would be actually on the post detail. So what we're going to do right now is, first off, we're going to make a new property that's going to actually get the content type for the particular model itself. And that's so we can reference it wherever we need. I'm going to go ahead and copy the comments property just to get the syntax and everything. And I'll do get content type. That's what I'm going to call it. And I'm going to go ahead and go into comment models, and I'm going to copy this import here into our models for posts and bring that in. So content type, we want to actually return the content type of this particular model, right? So I'm just going to say content type equals to objects.get for model, and it's going to be instance dot class. And again, those underscores, and then we're going to return that content type. This is just mainly because we're going to set this inside of our content form, or excuse me, our comment form. So now that we've got that, let's go into our comments, and we're going to make a new form in here. We'll call it forms.py, of course. And we have to do from Django import forms. And we're going to make a new class, and we're going to call it comment form. And of course, this takes forms.form. And the first thing that we want is content type. So the content type for the model that we're going to be working with, and that's forms.charField. And we're going to do a widget of forms.hiddenInput. So we want the content type to be hidden, right? We don't want the user to be able to actually see the content type. And then we're also going to do the object ID the same way. So I'll just do object ID equals to forms dot, this time it's going to be integer field. And then finally we want our content, which will be forms.charField, and widget equals to forms.text area. Cool, so that's how I'm going to leave this form for now, but realistically we've got our content type, we've got our object ID, as well as our content. That is exactly what we want to see. And the last thing I am going to put in here, because we will come back to it, which is going to be parent ID. And I'm going to say required equals to false. I actually don't want to make sure that the parent ID is in there, because this is going to be related to replies. But I'm going to leave it in the blank for now and actually comment it out, because we will come back to it. But something to start thinking about when we design forms, or when we design anything. Actually, we want to think about, several steps ahead what we might need. So that's why I did that. Okay, so now that we've got this comment form, let's actually go ahead and jump into our view, our detail view for post. And we're going to bring this comment form in here. So we want to import it right above comments. So from comments.forms, import comment form. And now in post detail, we're going to say form, or more specifically, we want to call it comment form equals to comment form. And I'm going to leave it as that for a second. And we're going to bring it in here. So I put it in the context, the comment form is here. And the first thing I want to do is request.post or none. And if comment form is valid, we'll do some stuff. So if comment form.is valid, we're going to print comment form.cleaned data. Okay, so we've got some of the basic stuff done, but we actually need to set initial data on this comment form. Now, if you're not familiar with this stuff, definitely check out Try Django 1.9, but we also have forms and form sets on our website on joincfe.com. That will actually go into more depth of forms on, again, joincfe.com/project. You're going to look for forms and form sets. That covers a lot of this stuff in more detail than what we're going to go through here. But basically what we want to do is set some initial data. So initial data is equal to a dictionary. And this dictionary is going to be related to the fields. So the first field was content type. And we want to set the content type for the instance, which, if you remember, we did instance.get content type. We did that at the very beginning. And it's a property, so we don't actually have to run it and use the parentheses. And then object ID is instance.id. And that's the initial data. That's all we want initially. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that and set this equals to initial equals to that. So we've got our initial data, we've got our content form, and there we go. So now we can actually print out that data once we run it. Of course, we have, oops, we want to spell initial correctly. There we go. And we have our comment form actually inside of the context, so we can go into our post detail here. And right underneath comments, I'm going to add it in here. And I'll just say comment form. And of course, we want to wrap this into a form with a method of post and the action going directly to where it is. And then we're going to close off that form. We want to put an input type of submit. So input button here. Input type equals to submit. And value equals to post comment. And then class, we'll do btn and btn default. And then we want a CSRF token. So CSRF token. And there we go. So now we've got our comment. So I'm going to go ahead and post a new comment. So say new comment and hit post comment. What we should see in our thing is post data, and we do. So what we got here is we've got our comment, new comment, object ID, and content type. Perfect. So it's all the things that we want to see to actually create a brand new comment. So now what we want to do is actually create this comment inside of this form valid method. I'm going to do it in here, and then down the line we might want to refactor this to do it somewhere different. But for now we're going to do it inside of this comment is valid, and I'm going to get each item in here. And realistically, I want to change the comment form to just being form, because we're not going to have another form on our detail for a little while. So I'm going to just come in here and call it form. The context can stay as comment form, but as far as the view is concerned, we're just going to call it form. It makes it a little bit easier for us to work with as well. So I'm going to say ctype equals to form.cleanedData.get, and this is going to be content type. And then we want to do object ID equals to form.cleanedData.get, and that's object ID. And then finally, we want to get our content data, which is equal to form.cleanedData.get, and that is content. So that's going to get all three of the things that we need to create a new comment. So let's make sure comments is actually imported, and it is. And then we also want to import the content type again. So we did delete it, but we want to bring it back in actually to our view. And here we go. So down here, we first of all want to, inside of our detail view, we want to turn this content type actually into content type equals to content type.objects.get. And now we're going to say model equals to ctype. So this is coming from the model, because remember how we actually set it in the get content type instance. We set it based off of the model class, right? So it actually is getting it from the model right here. And then we have that object ID, so that has to be an integer because of how the form is. So the form won't even validate if it's not an integer. And then finally, we have our contact data. So I'll just say new comment and created equals to comment.objects.get or create. And this is going to be a few things here. So I'm going to separate the lines out. And the first thing is user equals to request.user. Content type is equal to content type. Object ID is equal to object ID or obj ID. And then finally, content equals to content data. And then we can put an if clause here and say if created, print, yay, it worked. Or yeah, it worked. All right, so going back in here, we're going to do some new data, post that comment. Notice that there is some new data down here now. And what we see here is, yeah, it worked. So our comment actually commented as we expected. I'm going to get rid of this if created clause here. And we're going to update that stuff a little bit later. But now we've got this form kind of working the way we want it to do. And then inside of our template, I'm just going to make a little change here and load in Django crispy forms. So, or crispy form tags, excuse me. So crispy forms and tags. And we just want to make the form look a little bit better itself. And we'll say crispy So now if we go back in here, we see now that content is coming through here. Of course, you could add some additional stuff in here as far as the content is concerned. I'm actually going to get rid of the label for it in general for content. And I'll just say label equals to a blank label. And then that way it just says comments and you can post your own comment. Okay, so that is creating comments. Now, this is using, of course, the content type stuff. If we weren't using the content type, all of this would be a lot easier. But this is now a lot more flexible. So it's not necessarily better or worse. It's just more flexible for us if we want to use our comments somewhere else. Of course, the only reason it's more difficult, it has to do with this content type stuff. Otherwise, we could just ignore that completely and our form would be very, very simple. It would just have this, because then in our view, we could set our user here and then our post here. So that is something that we also might consider doing when we actually run this, but the reason I did it this way is to show you the flexibility of it, as well as to realize that there are a lot of different ways to actually solve these problems inside of Django. So sometimes it takes some creativity to make it happen, and understanding that there are options, but then at the same time, the best option is not always the most obvious. So that's why you also want to try out new things, and thus learning about content types and generic foreign keys is pretty awesome. So if you have any questions, let us know. Otherwise, let's keep going.